And we're back with Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul. It's good to have you back, Senator. We hope you fully recovered. And by the way, happy birthday as well.
Thank you. Thank you. I was wondering if I'd get any presents today, but I understand that the ethics rules of the Senate won't let me take any presents. But thanks for having me on.
That's right. Well, your presence is our present. Thank you. How are you feeling, by the way?
You know, a little better each day. It was sort of, I guess, a living hell for the first 4 or 5 weeks. You know, difficulty, couldn't get out of bed without assistance, 6 broken ribs, damage to my lungs, 2 bouts of pneumonia. I mean, it was really a tough go of it. But each day I feel a little bit better. You know, this last month I've been doing better.
You haven't talked about the motivation for this, but I mean, there is an increased in politics today. Things have gotten a little bit uglier. Do you talk? Was that a part of what happened here? And do you talk about that with your colleagues?
You know, my colleagues come up all the time and they want to make sure that there is some kind of deterrence because people don't want to think that it's open season on our elected officials. You know, I was also at the baseball field when we were shot at with semi-automatic fire, and, you know, Steve Scalise was severely wounded, and I was 10 feet from a young staffer who was shot in the leg. So, yeah, I've been involved in violent attacks twice in the last year, and so, yeah, we're very aware of it. And I think one of the things about motivations is people got obsessed, some in the media, about the motivations, but I think really, you know, we usually don't ask if someone's raped or mugged or whatever, why the person did it. We want punishment and deterrence, and I guess that's what I'm mostly about. I just don't think of any kind of motivation or justification, whether it's political or personal, to attack someone who's unaware from behind in their own yard.
Sure, although if it's politically motivated, those who are involved in politics might think about changing the way they behave to change that climate, but
maybe.
Let me ask you about the climate here in Washington, this new book about the White House, a lot of debate about it. As a politician, the president has responded by talking about his mental stability. Why do you suppose he did that when instead he could say, forget this book, we've passed tax cuts, we're defeating ISIS, we've nominated a bunch of judges? Why do you think he did that?
You know, I don't know. I guess my first response was this was sort of a gossipy book, kind of like a Kitty Kelly book back from, you know, when I was in high school. I remember her books would come out and nobody really believed them. They were treated as, you know, sort of like a sitcom or treated as a television show, but they weren't really treated seriously by the media. I do think from my experience, when I look at the president, I've been around the president quite a bit. I've been in the White House quite a bit with him. I can give you one example that I think really shows his great insight and ability to cut through to the chase and do things that ordinary politicians don't do. And that's when I took in the idea of letting individuals join together to buy insurance across state lines. Every politician, Republican and bureaucrat in Washington, said we couldn't do it, and they hadn't done it in 30 years. He looked at the original law. He told his lawyers, look at the original law and see if the interpretation of these previous government attorneys have been correct. And he had the wherewithal just to say, no, we're going to let individuals join these groups so they can get cheaper insurance and perhaps better insurance as well, and perhaps get insurance for people who don't have insurance. But he did that because he's different than any other politician. And now we have all these, you know, wiseacres out there wanting to criticize and be presumptuous about trying to judge someone's intelligence. I can tell you he's got the wherewithal to do things that no politician's been able to do, and in a good way.
Let me ask you a couple of policy questions on we talked about Section 702 of the FISA with the CIA director. You have held up a nomination of John Demers, and you're also talking about filibustering this. Why?
702 is supposed to get information on foreigners, and so we have a lower than constitutional standard. We say, well, the Constitution doesn't apply to people in other countries, and I agree with that. So we collect a massive amount of information on foreigners, but they talk to Americans. So after you gather millions and billions of bits of information, turns out there's a lot of Americans in the database. What we don't want to happen is that domestic law enforcement, policemen and FBI are looking in a database that was collected without constitutional protections, and let's say they decide to prosecute medical marijuana people in Colorado, which is legal in Colorado, but now the federal government's talking about changing their policy and going after them. What if they're searching a database that was collected on foreigners to get incidental information on medical marijuana in Colorado? I have a real problem with that. So they should have to get a warrant before they look at that. And really none of that information should be used for domestic crime because it was gathered with a less than constitutional standard.
So you have a problem with it. What are you going to do?
We'll try to stop them. You know, the people on the other side, the CIA director and others, they want permanent reauthorization, no reform. And when you ask them, are you using this for domestic crime? There's a little bit, you know, they kind of say, well, we don't do it very often, but they won't tell you whether they're sort of looking at the information and then not presenting it in court, but using that information to develop what's called parallel construction, develop cases. They want just permanent reauthorization, which to me means no more oversight by Congress. The reason we need more oversight is that people, as Madison said, men are not angels. And we've seen recently how we've had some people in the FBI that had bias against the president. We also have seen now people in the Department of Justice who were married to people that were doing opposition research on Trump. So you can see how people are human and bias could enter into this. And the history of the CIA and the FBI are not without blemish. You know, the Hoover years are a great tarnish. We also had civil rights activists in the 60s illegally spied upon. We had Vietnam protesters illegally spied upon. And we had this great to-do, the Church Commission back in the 70s. And FISA was supposed to rein that in. But now many of us, Senator Wyden and I, have in a bipartisan way looked at this and said, my goodness, we have to defend the Americans' right to privacy. And right now, we're sort of a minority in the Senate. In the House, though, it's close to 50-50.
All right, Senator, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much, and happy birthday again.
Thank you.
And we'll be back in a moment.